Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lisa White, CML's Membership Services Manager, and it is a pleasure to have all of you today joining us on today's webinar entitled An Urban Renewal Authority in Action. Great information about to be shared. Super excited that all of you are here. If you're an elected official and you registered, you will receive 1 university training credit. We will go ahead and automatically give that to you. Today's presentation, the PDF, is available on our website at cml.org under Training Materials. We are recording it and we'll post it to the website there a little bit later today. So if there's something that you want to listen to again, or perhaps send the link to a colleague who wasn't able to participate, that will be available and you can send that to them anytime. If you're not familiar with the webinar format, you should see a control panel to the top right of the screen. You have an orange arrow to the left of the panel which will minimize that entire box. We will be muting all of you for the webinar, but at the end we will encourage you to ask questions by typing them into the question box on the control panel. At this point, please allow me to introduce to you our presenters. From the City of Montrose, we have William Bell, or Bill Bell, who's the city manager there, Shani Wittenberg, who is Montrose's finance director, Thomas Peltz, Akutak Rock, he's the partner there, and then Alexandra Eisman, who's the senior vice president with D.A. Davidson. So with that, I am going to turn the controls over to our colleagues in Montrose.
Great. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa. So we are excited to talk about some things we've been working on here, and we're hoping that some of the other communities across the state can take some of these ideas and then reach out to any one of us who's part of the presentation later if you want more details. We're excited to share what we did in our community because it worked out really well and was a good collaboration at different levels. So we'll go through our slides, and then several of us will present, and then we'll take questions at the end, and we'll have plenty of time for that, I believe. As long as Shani has control, we'll go through the slides here. How's that working?
I can't make the slides change. Oh, there we go.
All right. So that's why we have Shani doing that and not me, because it would take me a while to figure that out, probably. So we really appreciate everyone on the line. We'll start out just, we want to talk a little bit about the situation we were in post-recession. As many communities across the state, that early 2007, 2008 to 2011 was a really hard time, especially outside of the Front Range. Us in the rural areas are probably 2 years lagging behind the Front Range when we go into recession, and then we're lagging coming out of the recession. And so we were faced with 5 years of cutting millions of dollars out of the budget and laying people off, doing early retirement packages and those types of things. And as most of us know, when you're on hard times, some of the first things you cut are related to capital improvements and deferred maintenance, infrastructure development, as well as training and those types of things. So we reached out to our partners at D.A. Davidson and got a lot of advice that we'll share with you today. We have about $40 million of deferred street maintenance when we did our analysis, which is very similar to a lot of other communities about our size. We're about 20,000 population. We service about 60,000. We're a regional hub. And so we have a lot of people coming in and out of our community, and about 85% of all of our revenues comes from sales tax, similar to many other mountain communities. We rely a lot on those tourists, but they put a lot of pressure on our streets and on our roads and infrastructure. So we were trying to figure out how to get out of the recession on our street maintenance, and we noticed when we were looking at our finances that there were some creative options for us, and that's what Shani's going to talk about here in a little bit. Another big thing we looked at was the need for new infrastructure. So not only the deferred maintenance and the major capital improvements, but what about handling the growth that was about to come? In 2015, we actually got back to pre-recession numbers as far as growth, and now we're going up every year in a significant fashion, patterning our growth after what's happening over on the Front Range. So now we're not only working on deferred street maintenance and those things, we're actually planning for the future and how do you incorporate that into your financials. And then to do all of that, we included that analysis and those types of things. So moving Montrose forward is what we've titled our efforts to get rid of our deferred street maintenance and move the Montrose community forward. We were actually, as part of our R&D model, rip off and duplicate. It was based on something we saw up in Greeley, Keep Greeley Moving, I think it was called. And so we copied that model a little bit, and we listed some of the key people on our staff, our city engineer, Scott Murphy, another engineer for us who was street superintendent at the time, Ryan Cushionen, and then our public works manager, Jim Scheid, were a big part of moving us forward. And we created a web page. We created this sign that goes all over town anywhere we're doing major capital improvements. We communicate that out to the public because people were used to the recession and they were used to not a lot of activity on the streets. And when you're doing 5 years of improvements in 1 year, people are excited about getting their streets fixed, but they don't want any street closures, of course. So we tried to make sure communication was really important. The next slide you can see is part of our communication to the city council and to the community. We wanted to put it right out there in advance. Going into 2018, here's exactly where we're going to be doing work and what type of work are we going to be doing. When we talk about our financing on this project, it was primarily major street maintenance and major improvements, which are things like mill and overlay work, cape sealing, complete reconstruction of streets in a lot of places, and then we even had some in-house construction to make sure that our streets workers were feeling valued and part of the construction process. And so there's a combination of things on there. We have another document like that map for 2019, and we were able to take on 3 to 4 times the amount of work each year, so we'll be able to get a head start on that $40 million of deferred maintenance. We actually lost a public works director throughout the process. I think he got a little bit frustrated that he didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, and I think that's very common with public works staff who care a lot about what they're doing, and they don't see a lot of impact coming out of the recession. It was really hard on a lot of public works people across the state. We've talked to a lot of his colleagues in smaller communities, and they're in the same boat. So that was unfortunate. On the next, now we'd like to show you a video, if we can get it pulled up here. Is that going to work?
I don't know.
This our city engineer, Scott Murphy, and our PIO put this video together just as part of our communication out to the community to talk about some of these issues. And so we've already had requests from neighboring towns like Ouray and Ridgway. We actually help do a lot of their marketing in shared service agreements, and part of that is creating videography such as this to help them in their small communities get the word out to the public. So we're going to run that if we can get it to work here. Is everybody seeing the video?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So this year we'll be doing about 12 million or so in street maintenance and capital improvement projects. The street maintenance side, we're targeting to spend about 5 million over the next 2 years. This year you'll see a lot of millet overlays where you'll get essentially a new pavement road. One of those will be South Hillcrest, South Park, and then Niagara between Hillcrest and Townsend. Then you'll also see some Cape Seal treatments throughout town, probably about 5 miles of those, which is essentially a fancy chip seal. You get a chip seal, which is tar coated with gravel on top, and then a surface slurry on top of that to create a nice driving surface, and bring back our roads and take care of some of our deferred maintenance that's kind of stacked up over the years. Yeah, so a lot of times we're trying to stay ahead and get rid of all of our old pipelines in the ground. Some of the original pipelines were cast iron, which corrode very quickly around here. We think we've replaced all of those, but every now and again we find some. Whenever we do, we replace those right off the bat because usually they're on the verge of breaking, or we found them because they did break. But otherwise, we replace several miles of water pipelines and sewer pipelines per year to just stay ahead of the aging infrastructure, as a lot of them are getting to the end of their service line. One of the things that we're doing in 2018 is creating a centralized project website where you can go for product information on all capital projects and maintenance projects to find out what's going to be done and where. And that website will be, it's movemo.co, shortness for Move Montrose Forward. On there you have interactive maps you can click and get more information on any project and who's doing it.
So we've had really good results. The community loves being able to access that, especially parents on their way to school, making sure that they know the right routes to take so they're not late taking their kids to school. We based a lot of those improvements on a 2016 household community survey where our top 3 issues facing our community from the residents' perspective was traffic congestion, street maintenance, and economic development. And so 2 out of the 3 are being addressed, and then we're working currently on some of the business development models. One of those economic development ideas for us was the creation of an urban renewal authority. So we want to talk about that a little bit. As we know, state law changed in Colorado and just recently, and we were the second community in the state to go through with a new URA after that law changed. The biggest change in that, it really didn't change our practice here in Montrose. We always reached out to all of our other taxing entities to create collaborative partnerships, but some communities did not do that. And so with that law changing, it forced communities who were creating urban renewal authorities to actually go out and bring all the taxing entities to the table and negotiate with each one of them individually. So we were able to do that. We have about 11 taxing entities that we had to negotiate with, and we were able to do all of that in a 4-month period. So we drafted the entire plan with the help of Paul Benedetti, a URA attorney over on the Front Range, and we were very successful and very pleased with the results of our negotiations. As part of that URA project, there's a slide here just showing some of our partners on that. We couldn't have done that in such a quick timeline if we didn't partner already and have a lot of shared service agreements and collaborative partnerships already in place, and a sense of trust among all of our entities. So it's one thing we would recommend for people is don't wait until you need something from your neighbors. Build that trust and those relationships in advance, so when the time of need rises, you'll already have built that and you don't have to go through that. It really helps things move a lot faster. Our Montrose Urban Renewal Authority project is called Colorado Outdoors. You may have heard of it. We've been trying to get the word out across the state. And, thankfully, the governor put a plug in for us during the State of the State address. And we have some excellent private partners in the Dragoo family who own Ross Reels and Mayfly Outdoors as partners. They're the only landowners in the entire URA. So it makes it a lot easier than some urban renewal authorities where you have to have a board of 15 to 20 or more landowners and get them to agree. So ours is a $200 million project over the next 25 years. We're only 3 years into it, and so patience and perseverance is the name of the game when it comes to long-term capital development. What we wanted to share a little bit is the types of projects we're working on related to the URA. Our project is a little bit unique, although we have some other Western Slope URA or DDA or other types of developments that are related to outdoor recreation. Ours is a little unique in that we have 3 components to it. One is the upland development, the economic development side for businesses. Another portion is the recreational trail that connects our community. And then we also have the in the river piece of our project. The recreation trail is actually copied a little bit on Durango's model of having a river corridor trail that goes up and down the river, has several crossings going over and under major highways, so you can get pedestrians and bicycle traffic throughout your community without having to cross the highway here in town. This is Highway 550. We're getting a really bad echo. I'm hoping everyone else isn't getting that echo. If you are, I apologize for that. We are very excited on the rec trail that it's about a $3.4 million project. Because of our partnerships, we were able to get $2 million of that funded through GOCO, and we are very thankful for our partnerships with DOLA and Great Outdoors Colorado and several other entities across the state who are willing to reinvest in our community. We're very thankful for that. So that will connect our community rec center, which is a new rec center, $28 million facility on the south end of town, all the way to the Colorado Outdoors development on the north side of town, and really bring all segments of our population together via the recreational trail system. And we're starting the actual construction on that in 2019 to move that forward. Another part of the URA development is the actual river improvements. And as with any river, over time, the banks of the river meander and change course. If you're going to put $200 million worth of buildings in a business park, you definitely don't want the river cutting that out. So we're working closely with CPW and with Friends of the Uncompahgre River, Trout Unlimited, and the Army Corps of Engineers to make sure that we can do bank stabilization to hold the river in place over the next 50 years. And then also put in new habitat under the water to create gold medal trout waters in this stretch of river. And that will make us having Paco, which is close to the Ridgeway Reservoir, and then the east portal of the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. And then right here in Montrose will be the 3rd set of gold medal trout waters for visitors, tourists, and residents to get out and about and enjoy the sport of fly fishing. It'll be a multi-use river corridor. We still want people to be able to raft up and down our river. And so it'll be a multi-use section. It will not be closed off fly fishing only. It will actually be a multi-use river to support the upland side of the development. So we're really excited about that. And that's becoming the most difficult challenge for us on the financing side. There aren't a lot of grants and those types of things when you're working in the riverway. And then, as most of you know, there's a lot of permitting that takes place, and that's going to take about 5 years to get that project done because of just the timelines and procedures that you have to go through to do work out in the river. But we're really excited to start that in 2019 as well. Then the upland side, our business park is going to be a mixed-use business park. We'll have housing mixed throughout the development. On the south end, we'll have modern apartment complexes. As you work your way north, we'll have studio working areas with loft residential above the working areas for people who want to work, live, and play in the same area of town. And then we'll also have mixed in townhomes and single family up and down the river to provide some residential opportunities near those gold medal trout waters. The other piece on that that's really exciting is a high-end hotel that will be coming in, as well as restaurants and retail. But most importantly, the entire park is designed for outdoor manufacturers manufacturers or retail businesses related to the outdoor industry. And so we've already met with about 15 businesses, and we're starting to get some traction. We're doing the public improvement side of it right now, and we're almost done with that. We'll be done at the end of this month, which is about $9 million worth of public infrastructure. And what we're finding is it's not as easy to recruit businesses until you have something they can see that's tangible. And so even though we might be visionary or consider ourselves that to be visionary, private business owners don't want to invest money until they can see it on the ground. So we're excited to get that work done so they can see the water and sewer and street infrastructures in place, and then we think that will start moving relatively quickly. If you're over in the area, you can also see Mayfly's world headquarters being built right now in that area, and this is what that building will look like. And this will also be the tone for the entire business park, buildings using natural materials as well as some steel and those types of things, but a lot of windows and just a good feeling of being out in the outdoors and enjoying nature while going up and down the business park, or either as a visitor, a shopper, or one of the residents, whether business or residential, of the park itself. So in order to make all that happen, you have to have really good finance staff. And thankfully, we have Shani with us. She's going to talk to you a little bit on the financing side. And I do want to put a plug in for her and all the other finance directors of our local governments who are conservative enough to make sure that, one, their city managers don't go to jail. We always appreciate that. But more importantly, they plan for the long-term success and future of their communities by being responsible stewards of our tax dollars. And we have an excellent one here, and I know a lot of our finance directors around the state are doing the very same thing Shani is, which is looking out for our long-term interests. So I just want to say thanks to her, and then I'll turn it over to Shani.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, here in Montrose, financing is always scary. I think everybody can kind of relate to that. But here in Montrose, we have some really good fund balances in our funds, which is great. And so instead of going out and borrowing right away to make this project happen, we actually both projects, both the deferred maintenance piece and then the URA piece, we actually loaned money to the URA out of the general fund with promissory notes that will pay the general fund back at, I believe, a 4% interest, and also out of the water fund, $1.7 million. These funds were used to create the public infrastructure in the park. So it wasn't used to create any sort of buildings for Mayfly or anything like that. It was all the curb, the gutter, the sidewalks, the streets. Then also during the whole process, which it was amazing to go from nothing to full bore in 6 months. But part of that process, we did negotiate with our partners, the taxing districts in Montrose, and we're able to negotiate a sales tax TIF for the city. That includes sales, use, and excise taxes. So those are taxes that we are not currently collecting. And as those businesses develop, we will use it to reinvest in the URA area. Then we also negotiated with the county and some of our property tax collectors, actually all of them, and those agreements are different for each entity. We went in and assessed what their needs were and what their ongoing needs were and what their concerns were going forward. For instance, the fire district, they had a huge issue with losing any property taxes, especially in their current situation with Gallagher and with their need to service that area. So the fire district gave up very little of their property taxes, but some of the others, they were very, very gracious to allow a property tax TIF. And then the third piece of our financing, we had to look outside. So the ability to borrow new money came with the timing was perfect. It wasn't planned this way, but it was perfect. We paid off our current bonded debt that was in the general fund in October of 2017, which allowed us to borrow more money and not increase our expenditures out of the general fund. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tom Peltz, who's going to talk a little bit about that, how those legally can be structured.
And thanks, Shani. It's kind of been a pleasure working on the financing with the city, and I've enjoyed or had the privilege of having a relationship as the city's bond counsel for about 25 plus years. So, oftentimes when I get involved in the financings, they're pretty far along. And in this particular financing, Shani had sent an email around the 4th of, I think, August of last year, basically indicating that they'd been busy creating an urban renewal authority and their engineers were in the final stages for a TIF financing. And then also, Shani had indicated that they were kicking around the idea of financing other street improvements that would be a general fund obligation. So they had done a lot of work in a relatively short period of time. And so when she reached out to me for my thoughts, initially the decision that anybody makes is whether or not you've identified a revenue stream, which the city had. They'd really established the revenue streams that were available to pay back some form of borrowing. And the next step is typically, well, are we going to go to a vote on this kind of an obligation? Or is this something that we can do without a vote? In a higher interest rate environment, some of these options would generally be weighted with the consideration of what are the interest costs going to be. But we've enjoyed such a low interest rate environment, especially last year, and the circumstances surrounding this financing, that really the no vote options were good. And those were really, could the URA do a financing, which we know that they can borrow without going to a vote. But in this instance, the URA's projects were only a portion of what the city wanted to accomplish in getting the efficiencies of really doing a single financing. And so the other option that's open to municipalities and other local governments is really lease purchase. And Shani had identified that early on and said, well, is there some form of lease purchase or COP that we could do? So sort of having looked at that step, you then look at, what is the concept of a lease and what kind of constraints does that present? And, one of the things when we work with municipalities, it's always the case. You can't just take a borrowing or a loan and slap the title of lease on top of it and say, okay, we can now do this financing, without a vote, because the vote comes into play, obviously, because of Tabor considerations. So one of the first elements that we always look at is, okay, what's the collateral going to be? What are we going to lease? And in this case, we were dealing, predominantly with street or road improvements, curb and gutter, those kinds of things. And obviously, when you scratch your head and say, can we lease a curb and gutter, that's really not usually great collateral. And it's also hard to describe, when you're sort of looking at creating a lease type structure. So the city looked to substituted collateral, which is the common approach that a lot of people will do. So you look around and you look at your a book of assets and you try and determine, is there something that we've got that has value that's a non-encumbered asset? And in this case, the city identified initially 3 properties: the City Hall, which is basically the city's administrative offices, Pavilion Event Center, which is a larger 600 or so seat auditorium that has a ballroom and meeting space, and a relatively new facility with full kitchens, and it's quite a nice facility. And then the Montrose Elks Civic Building. And so in looking at that, we knew we had enough collateral to cover the funded portion that the city wanted to fund. The next thing we kind of look at when we're doing financings is sort of duration. Oftentimes people will look to do lease purchase financings and maybe try and do it over a relatively short period of time. But one of the concepts of a lease is that you've got to be paying fair rental value on an annual basis. And so we were kind of constrained by that. But luckily, in this case, the city was looking to fund some of the elements over a shorter term, but for the most part, wanting to do about a 25-year duration for the full financing. And so the final thing to look at with respect to a lease, or at least one of the things to take into consideration, is one of the early lease cases, which was really the Lakewood City Hall financing back in 1981. But there was the concept that the city couldn't be compelled to renew a lease on an annual basis. It really had to be structured like a lease. The rent has to be a reasonable amount, so that there's not a practical compulsion to to renew that lease on an annual basis because, as we had mentioned before with respect to Tabor, these leases all have to be subject to annual appropriation. And so in general, the lease has to be structured in a way so the city could theoretically walk away from the obligation if the city council so determined. So basically with those elements, what we structured was a leaseback financing. Initially we wanted to do a single lease and then release part of the collateral because we had more value in those assets than really the amount that was to be borrowed. And in this case, the city was looking to finance about $10 million of the total funding package. And so we were going to try and release the pavilions partway into the financing because the city was looking at the revenue streams and was comfortable that with the tax increment revenues that were coming in, that there was going to be the ability to probably pay off a portion of this obligation sooner than later. With the lenders that the city was talking to, and Alex will go into that a little bit in a second, they really didn't want to have a structure where part of the collateral was released during the term of the financing. And so in sort of looking at that element, we decided to go with a two-lease structure using two of the assets. We used the pavilion and the city hall. And with that structure, that enabled us to negotiate a fixed rate, or Alex negotiated a fixed rate on the pavilion financing and a variable rate on the city hall financing, and really kind of accomplish the ability of the city in that lease structure to pay off and have that pavilion released earlier than the city hall. And then, finally, what are some of the time frame components that you run into or considerations that you run into? One of them tends to be title insurance issues. It turns out that, well, whenever you do a lease financing, you're going to want to make sure that you look at title early on in the process. Because in this case, for example, the city hall, I think, was composed of 7 or so lots. One of the lots, the deeds ran back to the city more than a century. And there was a little bit of trouble trying to find that particular deed, which ultimately was done. But some of those things kind of take a little bit of time. And then other things like, how long in this process is are the banks or the lenders that you're looking to willing to fix the interest rates? And in this case, it was a 60-day period. So that kind of constrained our time frame to make sure that with respect to the rates that were presented to the city could take advantage and lock those rates in. And then finally, when you're dealing with municipalities, there's always the question of authorization. And if you walk through a two-reading structure with the need to look to a referendum period of 30 days before you close, is council comfortable using an emergency ordinance so that you can kind of meet the timeframes that are involved in authorization of the financing and getting it closed? And in this case, Bill and Shaney were great in communicating with council and getting council comfortable with just a one reading emergency process. So those were some of the elements involved in that. And I think with that, maybe Alex can go into some of her slides on the actual time frame.
Thank you, Tom, and hi, everybody. Yeah, the time was right, and time was of the essence. I think that's what sums up this financing. Shaney and Tom already and Bill talked about that. All the signs were pointing to green by the time that we came on board at D.A. Davidson in the summer of 2017. The city did have adequate general fund revenues to service annual appropriation obligations, so these COPs, so it was an option for us. They did not need to raise additional tax revenues because that would have delayed the financing with the voting process that Tom just pointed out. We at D.A. Davidson, we looked into the cost differential of these two structures. The COPs normally do cost a little bit more in annual interest rates because the revenue stream is reliant on this annual appropriation, and it's not as committed as the sales and use tax revenue stream. So you do get a little bit of a not as great of a deal normally. However, as Tom was earlier saying, we were in a very low interest rate environment, and the cost differential that we looked at when we ran, initial numbers based on a public offering for both of these structures was very minor. So I think at the time it was a cost differential of maybe just under $8,000 a year that the COPs would cost the city more. But again, you could, minimize the time frame and therefore take advantage of the low interest rate environment, whereas having to go to a vote would blow out this time frame. Let's see here. So we came on board in late August 2017 to serve as the city's placement agent, which essentially means that we're chartered to find the right bank for a $10 million tax-exempt bank qualified COP transaction. And that's, we put together with the city's help and legal counsel's help, a comprehensive RFP package that then goes out to many banks. I'll cover that in a little bit here. The structure was decided to be a fully amortizing structure with a 20-year final maturity. And as we have now talked about quite a bit, this lease-back structure that would be secured by these annually appropriated lease rental payments on the City Hall and the Pavilion Event Center. And that's what we went out with to, I believe, it was 30 banks were approached, regional banks as well as national banks, including Colorado banks. And we had a really great result. We got 16 different proposals back from 7 different banks. Obviously, as you can imagine, the terms were very varied. There were a slew of different covenants, different relationship requirements, if any, as many different call features, and then some offered this rate lock feature, and they had different durations on that. Also, depending on the structure and the services offered or required, the interest rates varied greatly from under 3%, the lowest was 2.72% at the time, to 4.35%, which is quite a bit of a different annual debt service payment when you run the numbers over these 20 years. Again, good timing because the bank market was very active in 2017. This is prior to the passing of the tax bill that hampered the appetite a little bit. After that, these tax-exempt loans are no longer as attractive for banks to offer. And so we had a lot of demand that created really good competition at the time. And also what we saw was not just great rates, but also these longer term commitments that were offered by banks. City was looking for a 25-year commitment, and we got it. Since then, we have seen that shrink a little bit. I think we can still see 10 years, sometimes 15 years, but we were lucky to get this really long commitment out of the winning bank. We worked obviously with the whole team to come up with the most favorable proposal, which is low cost, but also really good covenants and good relationship terms, which, the honeymoon period always seems good, but you stay married for 15 years and, you do want to have a good covenant in place here. So we ended up doing this deal with a fixed rate structure at this low 2.72% for the first 15 years. And then we would kick into a variable rate structure for the remaining 5 years. The initial rate on this variable rate is a 1.91%, obviously subject to change. The remaining principal that is left over from years 15 to 20 is just around $3 million. And even though it is an exposure to interest rate environment that could clearly be increasing from year 15 through 20, the exposure itself is minimized by the tax increment revenue that the city is looking to get back, and therefore could repay this variable rate financing at any time that they want it. So it is risk, but it also creates a lot of financing and refinancing flexibility. the winning bank had offered a 60-day rate lock. That was the longest rate lock of any of the proposals that we saw. And it was really good that we were able to complete the financing within the 60-day time frame, because lo and behold, interest rates had risen a little bit, and we were able to keep the bank at the promised rate, which saved the city about $10,000 in interest costs right out of the gate. And we, dealing with the team, everybody had already done a lot of work on the city side. They came with the financing pretty much, planned out. So we were able to successfully execute in just 2 months, which is a fast clip. Most financings are about 3 months. So it was a great deal, and we were very excited to be working with the team.
Awesome. Great information. Thank you so much. At this time, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in. We do have a couple, so I'm just going to read those, and then our panelists can certainly chime in. Are your 3 projects 3 separate plan areas with 1 landowner for each, or do you mean that you have 3 undertakings or activities occurring? Montrose, you want to chime in there?
Sure. All of our URAs, 1 district with 1 landowner on the private side. We chose to do the URA Board of Directors with council making up 5 out of the 8 URA board member positions, and then we had to have representation from the county and the school district, as well as 1 rep for all the special districts. And then the private landowner is technically not on the URA board, but attends all the board meetings and is a big part of all the discussions. So it's 1 district with 3 separate projects within the district.
Terrific. Thank you, Bill. Steve, if that didn't answer your question, just feel free to follow up with another. Anyone else has any questions, feel free to type those in now. At this point, I certainly have to mention CML's 2019 annual conference, believe it or not, is already scheduled June 18 through 22nd. So it's going to be in Breckenridge in 2019, so we hope that you'll mark your calendar. We will have some scholarships available. We'll start promoting that in the newsletter, so keep an eye out for that. So with that, I'm not seeing any other questions. Steve did say you answered it properly, so thank you, Bill. He did get the information he needed. So with that, remember that this is going to be recorded and posted to the website cml.org under training materials. So with that, thank you all so much for participating. We really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Lisa.